And that's when I found out that they'd found Tanya a few miles down the street.
Just 6 days on from the discovery of Gemma Adams, the revelation of a second body being found was unfolding across the country.
Got a phone call from the weekend. My computer just said, look, this doesn't look good. Don't pack for a night. I would pack for the best part of a week. We don't know where this is going. So I arrived up in Copdock to the scene of where the second body had been found, Tanya Nicol. It was pouring with rain. Through the sort of windshield of the car, you could see the distance to police car lights flashing. The road was blocked off, and suddenly what had once felt like perhaps a very short trip for an isolated, very tragic death of a young woman now took on a slightly more sinister angle.
As Christmas approached in 2006, Ipswich would be plagued by a killer on a ruthless spree. Beginning with the disappearance of 19-year-old Tanya Nicol in early November, by the 8th of December, Tanya's body and that of Gemma Adams had been found in a brook on the outskirts of Ipswich. While the town came to terms with the grave situation, an ominous atmosphere began to envelop the area.
A little bit of honey started to creep in, like not wanting to walk out on your own at the night time once it got dark, and making sure your children were okay and escorting them everywhere.
There was a culture of fear in many respects. There were more police on the streets, handing out rape alarms to women.
Friends of the street girls noticed the increased police presence was not welcomed.
To be honest, a lot of the girls was pissed off about it because we couldn't get the money. So with the police being there, they couldn't go and get what they needed to get anyway. So yeah, you felt a bit safe, but at the same time, they're all shouting at them because they want them to go away, because they want, do you know what I mean? They want people to be driving around. So because otherwise you're going out there for nothing really.
Then on the 10th of December, just 2 days on from finding the body of Tanya Nicol, a third horrifying discovery was made.
When I got a call from the force control room to say that a motorist had driven through the street at Necton, and this motorist reported finding what appeared to be the naked body of a female. My mind was racing when I got this call, because you're immediately thinking, who is it? And as we now know, that was the body of Annalie Alderton.
Found laid out and posed in a cruciform position, the disturbing ritual demonstrated that the killer was becoming ever bolder. Unlike Tanya and Gemma before her, 24-year-old Annalie had not been reported missing, making the revelation of her untimely end all the more shocking.
I got a phone call from the news desk, and they said something on the lines of, you're not going to believe it, but the police have just announced that they've found the body of a third woman. Suddenly, tension raised several notches. Are we now talking about a serial killer? Are we talking about somebody picking off young women right from under the police's noses?
Living in the heart of the area from where the girls were disappearing, Steve Wright had a history of violent behaviour towards women.
He had a track record for being brutal, for being violent, against his two previous wives.
We've got an individual who would batter his partners, and we know that that's usually a hallmark symptom of men who feel inadequate, who feel they can't cope, who feel they're not in control of the relationship, and they don't feel terribly manly, that they lack something in their machismo.
Steve Wright was all about trying to be something he wasn't, trying to live out or find excitement in his life, and it was pretty tough. It's tough for a lot of people to find excitement. He found it in prostitution. He also found it in gambling. It meant that he built up debts.
By the year 2000, Steve Wright's life was in steady decline. With drinking and gambling taking their toll, Wright had accrued £40,000 of debt, yet he continued his habit of paying for sex. Frequent. Wright began to take his fantasies out into the open.
Money gets tight, you have responsibilities, bills to pay. Suddenly it makes more sense to be out on the streets where you can turn a trick for 20 quid rather than 50, 60, 70 pounds in a massage parlour. And so that's how we find eventually Steve Wright coming out onto the streets rather than doing what he did to get his kicks behind closed doors.
Later that same year, Wright would hit the bottom of his spiralling depression.
Right, he tried to top himself at one time, just for everything that got to him, and then he sort of came back like they have done when they ever get in trouble. They normally come back home to see his dad and that, and he came back here. Dad sort of set him up.
This was a man either crying out, hoping he'd get caught, or being an attention seeker on the one hand, or this was a man who genuinely felt that his life was that tragic that he just needed to be here no longer.
After working in a succession of small-time jobs, Wright eventually took employment at the Felixstowe docks.
When he come back here, he just went more and more silent about things, and he wouldn't sort of chat about nothing really. He went more into himself and quiet and non-confrontational to anybody. Dad set him up at his, then he got the job down on the docks. Everything was going well. We sort of, well, that's been sort of settled for now.
He was now involved in another